You're about to unlock something most men will never see coming. Right now, as you're watching this, women in your life are running psychological experiments on you. They're collecting data on your character, your strength, your worthiness, and you have no idea it's happening. These aren't the obvious tests you've heard about. This isn't her asking you to open a jar or carry something heavy. These are the invisible assessments that determine whether she sees you as a man she respects or just another guy she can manipulate. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to recognize these hidden tests and respond in ways that make her see you as the prize she needs to earn. The moment you understand this, everything changes. You'll stop walking into her psychological traps. You'll stop failing tests you didn't know you were taking. Most importantly, you'll start passing them without even trying, because you'll finally understand what she's really looking for. Picture this scenario. You're texting back and forth with a woman you're interested in. The conversation is going well, there's chemistry, maybe you've been on a date or two, then suddenly she sends you a message that seems completely out of nowhere. Maybe she mentions another guy's name casually in conversation. Maybe she tells you about how some random dude approached her at the coffee shop. Maybe she mentions she's going out with her girlfriends to a place where she knows there will be other men. Your immediate reaction tells you everything. Do you feel a spike of jealousy? Do you suddenly feel compelled to ask questions about this other guy? Do you find yourself wanting to remind her that you exist, maybe by sending her a funny meme or asking what she's up to later? If any of these impulses hit you, you just failed a test you didn't know you were taking. Here's what actually happened. She dropped another man's name into the conversation to see how secure you are in yourself. She's testing whether you're the kind of man who gets rattled by competition, or the kind who genuinely doesn't care because he knows his own value. The secure man, the one who passes this test, responds with complete indifference. He might acknowledge what she said with something simple like, "That's cool," and then either changes the subject or doesn't respond at all if the conversation naturally ended. The insecure man fails spectacularly. He asks follow-up questions. He tries to compete with this mystery guy by talking about his own accomplishments. He suddenly becomes more available, more attentive, more needy. She watches all of this happen and makes a mental note. This guy can be shaken. This guy doesn't really believe he's enough. This guy will chase me if I pull away.
But this is just the surface level. The real test isn't about jealousy, it's about frame control. She wants to know if you live in your own reality or if you'll enter hers the moment she creates a little drama. The man who passes this test doesn't just avoid jealousy, he remains completely unaffected by her attempt to shift the emotional dynamics of the interaction. Women don't do this maliciously. They do it because they need to know who you really are under pressure. They need to know if you're actually confident or just performing confidence when things are easy. They're testing for the kind of emotional strength they can rely on when life gets difficult, when real challenges emerge, when she needs a man who won't crumble under stress. Think about another common scenario. You're planning to meet up with her, and an hour before you're supposed to see each other, she cancels. But here's the key detail. Her reason seems legitimate, but there's something about how she delivers the cancellation that feels off. Maybe she's a little too casual about it. Maybe she doesn't immediately suggest an alternative time. Maybe she leaves you hanging about when you might reschedule. Most men respond to this situation by trying to fix it immediately. They become accommodating. They ask when she's free next. They might even offer to change their own plans to work around her schedule. They think they're being understanding and flexible. In reality, they're failing another invisible test. She canceled to see how you handle disappointment and whether you'll chase her when she creates distance. The man who passes this test responds with something like, "No problem, let me know when you want to reschedule," and then doesn't bring it up again. He doesn't double text, he doesn't ask follow-up questions. He treats her cancellation exactly like what it should be, her loss. Here's what she's really measuring. Does this man have a life that doesn't revolve around me? Does he have other options? Does he respect himself enough to not chase someone who just showed him she doesn't prioritize their time together? The answers to these questions tell her everything she needs to know about whether you're the kind of man she should invest in or the kind she can string along whenever she's bored. The brutal truth is that women are constantly calibrating their level of respect for you based on how you respond to these micro situations. Every interaction is data. Every response is information about your character, your confidence, your self-respect. She's not doing this consciously most of the time. It's evolutionary programming designed to identify men who possess the emotional and psychological qualities that signal long-term strength and reliability. The most dangerous test is the one that feels like affection.
She starts doing things that seem caring, helpful, or nurturing, but there's a subtle expectation attached. Maybe she offers to help you with something you never asked for help with. Maybe she starts giving you advice about your career, your appearance, or your social life. Maybe she begins managing small details of your life that you were handling perfectly fine on your own. Your natural instinct might be to appreciate this attention. You might think she's showing interest in your life, that she cares about your success, that she wants to be involved, but what's really happening is much more calculating. She's testing whether you'll let her control you through the illusion of care. The man who fails this test starts depending on her input. He begins asking for her opinion on decisions he used to make independently. He lets her schedule his time, influence his choices, or reshape his priorities. He mistakes her management for love and her control for investment. She watches this unfold and loses respect for him with every boundary he lets her cross. Here's the psychological reality. Women are attracted to men they cannot control, and they lose attraction to men they can. When she offers to help you with something you didn't ask for help with, she's not just being nice, she's testing whether you have strong enough boundaries to say no to something that appears beneficial, but actually diminishes your autonomy. The man who passes this test maintains his independence even when she offers to make his life easier. He says things like, "I appreciate the offer, but I've got it handled," or "Thanks, but I prefer to figure this out myself." He doesn't explain why he doesn't want her help. He doesn't justify his decision to remain independent. He simply maintains his boundaries with the quiet confidence of a man who knows his own mind. Watch how this plays out in the seemingly innocent moments. She suggests a restaurant for your date night. She recommends a different shirt for you to wear. She offers to introduce you to someone who could help your career. Each of these moments is a micro-test of whether you'll defer to her judgment or trust your own. The counterintuitive truth is that the more you resist her attempts to improve or manage you, the more she respects you. The more you maintain your own decision-making process, the more attractive you become. She's not looking for a man she can fix or optimize. She's looking for a man who is already complete without her input. But here's where it gets really subtle. Sometimes the test isn't about what she does, it's about what she doesn't do. She stops initiating conversations as frequently. She becomes less available for plans. She responds to your messages with less enthusiasm than before. This isn't necessarily because she's losing interest. Often it's because she's testing whether you'll panic and start chasing harder. Most men respond to this shift by increasing their effort. They text more frequently. They try to be funnier, more charming, more available. They start planning better dates, giving more compliments, being more attentive. They think they need to win back her enthusiasm through increased investment. What they don't realize is that their increased effort is exactly what confirms her suspicion that they're not the high-value man she initially thought they might be. The man who passes this test does something that feels completely wrong to most guys. He matches her energy. If she's less available, he becomes less available too. If she's less enthusiastic in her messages, he mirrors that tone. If she stops initiating conversations, he stops initiating too. This isn't game playing or manipulation, it's self-respect. It's refusing to chase someone who isn't showing you the same level of interest you're showing them. What happens next reveals everything about female psychology that most men never understand. When you stop chasing her decreased interest with increased effort, when you simply match her energy level, she suddenly snaps back to attention. She starts wondering why you're not pursuing her harder. She begins questioning whether she misjudged your level of interest. She starts initiating again, not because you did anything to win her back, but because you demonstrated that you won't lose yourself chasing someone who pulls away. This is the paradox that breaks most men's brains. The less you chase, the more she pursues. The less you need her validation, the more she wants to give it to you. The more comfortable you are with her potential absence from your life, the more present she wants to be in it.
The deepest test she runs has nothing to do with your interactions with her. It's about how you handle other people when she's watching. She observes how you treat waiters, how you respond to disrespect from strangers, how you interact with other men, how you handle conflict. She's collecting data on your character when you think no one important is paying attention. Picture this scene. You're at dinner with her, and the waiter messes up your order. Not a big deal, just brings you the wrong dish. Your response in this moment tells her more about who you are than 100 perfect conversations ever could. Do you get visibly frustrated? Do you take it personally? Do you make a scene or treat the waiter poorly? Or do you handle it with calm authority, politely but firmly, getting it corrected without drama or emotional investment? She's not just watching how you handle the inconvenience. She's studying how you exercise power when you have it. She wants to see if you're the kind of man who becomes cruel when he has leverage over someone, or if you can maintain your composure and dignity even when someone fails to meet your expectations. The man who passes this test treats service staff with basic respect while still ensuring his needs are met. He doesn't apologize for wanting what he ordered, but he doesn't make someone else's mistake into a personal assault on his character. But the real test goes deeper. Later that evening, maybe days later, she might bring up the incident casually. That waiter was really incompetent, wasn't he? She's not looking for you to agree with her or validate her opinion. She's testing whether you'll throw someone under the bus to gain her approval, or if you'll maintain your own perspective regardless of what she wants to hear. The man who fails this test agrees with whatever opinion he thinks she wants him to have. He shapes his response based on what he believes will make her like him more. The man who passes simply states his own view. He made a mistake, but it wasn't a big deal. Or everyone has off nights. He doesn't argue with her perspective, but he doesn't abandon his own integrity to match her energy either. Women are constantly testing whether you'll compromise your principles to keep them happy. They need to know if you're the kind of man who has unchanging core values, or if you're just a people pleaser who will say whatever you think they want to hear. The paradox is that the more willing you are to disagree with her when you genuinely disagree, the more she trusts that your agreement means something when you do agree. Here's another layer most men miss entirely. She tests your reaction to her success and happiness that doesn't involve you. She gets a promotion at work, accomplishes something she's been working toward, or has a great time at an event you weren't part of. Your response to her independent success reveals whether you see her as a whole person or just as a source of validation for yourself. The insecure man feels threatened by her success or happiness that doesn't center around him. He might not say it directly, but there's something in his response that suggests he wishes he was more involved in her achievement. Maybe he immediately tries to relate it back to himself or his own experiences. Maybe he offers advice she didn't ask for about how she could have done it better. Maybe he subtly diminishes the accomplishment by pointing out how it's not that difficult or impressive. The secure man genuinely celebrates her independent success without needing to insert himself into it. His response is clean and authentic. "That's amazing, you should be proud of yourself." No hidden agenda. No need to make it about him, no attempt to position himself as the reason for her success or the source of wisdom about what she should do next. This test reveals whether you see her as a complete person who exists independently of your relationship with her, or whether you unconsciously see her as an extension of yourself whose primary purpose is to validate your worth as a man. Women can sense this difference immediately, and it determines whether they see you as a partner they can respect, or someone who will eventually become possessive and controlling. The final, invisible test is the most brutal, because it feels like betrayal when you recognize it. She shares something vulnerable with you, a fear, an insecurity, a past trauma, a current struggle, and then watches how you handle that information over time. Will you use her vulnerability against her when you're angry? Will you try to fix her problems instead of just listening? Will you treat her differently now that you know she's not perfect? Will you see her openness as weakness or as strength? Most men fail this test in ways they never see coming. They either try to become her therapist and solve all her problems, or they file away her vulnerabilities as ammunition for future arguments. Or they start treating her like she's fragile instead of like she's strong enough to trust them with her truth. The man who passes this test simply holds space for her vulnerability without trying to change her, fix her, or use it against her. He doesn't treat her revelation as a burden he now has to carry or a problem he needs to solve. He recognizes her openness for what it is,
a gift of trust that requires nothing from him except the security of knowing it's safe with him. The most sophisticated test she runs is one that happens in complete silence. She simply stops participating in the dynamic and watches what you do. No drama, no explanation, no obvious withdrawal. She just becomes neutral. She still responds when you reach out, but she doesn't initiate. She's still pleasant when you're together, but the extra spark is gone. She's not cold or distant, she's just ordinary. This is the test that destroys most men because it's so subtle they don't even realize it's happening until they're already failing it. Your brain starts creating stories about what went wrong. You begin analyzing every interaction, looking for the moment you screwed up. You start trying harder, being more attentive, more romantic, more available. You think you need to win back something you lost, but the truth is you never lost anything. You're just being evaluated. She's testing whether you need her emotional investment to feel good about yourself. She wants to see if you can maintain your own energy, your own happiness, your own sense of self-worth when she's not actively feeding you validation. The man who fails this test becomes increasingly desperate for her approval. He starts performing for her attention, trying to recreate whatever magic he thinks they had before. The man who passes this test doesn't change anything about his behavior. He continues being the same person who attracted her in the first place. He doesn't chase her withdrawn energy with increased effort. He doesn't take her neutrality personally. He maintains his own emotional state, regardless of how much validation she's providing on any given day. Here's what she's really measuring: emotional independence. She needs to know that you're attracted to her because you genuinely enjoy her company, not because you need her to feel complete. She's testing whether your happiness is dependent on her mood, her attention, her approval. The moment she senses that your emotional state fluctuates based on how much energy she's giving you, she knows you're not the man she thought you were. This test often happens right after things have been going really well between you. You've had great dates, amazing conversations, incredible chemistry, and then suddenly she goes neutral. It feels like whiplash, and your instinct is to chase that high you just experienced with her. But that instinct is exactly what she's testing for. Women do this because they need to know the difference between a man who wants them and a man who needs them. Want is attractive. It implies choice, desire, appreciation. Need is repulsive. It implies desperation, dependency, weakness. When you chase her neutral energy with increased effort, you're demonstrating need. When you maintain your own energy regardless of hers, you're demonstrating want. The brutal reality is that most of these tests aren't conscious. She's not sitting in her room planning psychological experiments to run on you. These are deeply embedded evolutionary behaviors designed to identify men who possess the traits that historically indicated long-term survival value: emotional strength, independence, leadership, and the ability to remain stable under pressure. But here's where most men get confused. They think passing these tests means being cold, distant, or playing games. They overcorrect and become artificially aloof, thinking that indifference equals strength. This is just another way to fail, because authentic indifference can't be faked. And women can sense the difference between genuine confidence and performed disinterest. The man who truly passes these tests isn't trying to pass them. He's simply being himself. A complete person who doesn't need external validation to feel whole. He responds authentically to situations without calculating how his response will be perceived. He maintains his boundaries not as a strategy, but as a natural expression of self-respect. He doesn't chase because he doesn't need to chase. He knows his own value and trusts that the right person will recognize it. Here's the part that will blow your mind. When you stop trying to pass her tests and just live according to your own principles, you automatically pass them all. When you stop worrying about whether she's losing interest and focus on whether you're genuinely interested in her, you become the kind of man she can't help but respect. When you stop trying to control her perception of you and just be consistently yourself, you become the kind of man she wants to earn respect from. The ultimate test isn't really about your responses to her behavior.
It's about whether you need her tests to validate your worth as a man. The moment you understand that her opinion of you is just one person's perspective and not the ultimate measure of your value, you become untestable. Not because you don't care, but because your sense of self isn't dependent on the outcome. Women test you because they need to know who they're dealing with. They need to know if you're strong enough to handle their emotions, independent enough to maintain your own identity, and secure enough to not need their constant validation. But the deepest truth is this: the man who doesn't need to pass these tests is the only man who consistently does. You don't win her respect by figuring out the right responses to her tests. You win her respect by being the kind of man who doesn't need her respect to know his own worth. Here's your test. If you can handle the uncomfortable truth I just dropped, prove it by hitting like. If you're ready to stop being manipulated and start seeing through her psychological games, subscribe right now. Share this with any guy who's tired of being played.
The weak will scroll past. The strong will take action.